The bullet punched through the cockpit glass and buried itself 2 inches from Lena Mercer's skull. She didn't scream. She dropped flat, blood from the shattered windshield raining across her face, and grabbed the flight controls with both hands. Behind her, a man in hospital scrubs, a man they'd trusted, racked the slide and aimed again. "You don't get to leave," he hissed. 5 Navy SEALs were bleeding on the hangar floor. The pilot was dead. The generator was dying. And outside Fort Ketchikan Military Hospital, Alaska, an army of smugglers was circling through the worst storm in 40 years. 12 hours earlier, every one of those SEALs had laughed at her. Then she said 2 words, "SEAL Team 9, and nobody laughed again. Before we go on, subscribe and follow this story to the very end. Drop a comment. Tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story reaches. Jack Harding had been awake for 31 hours. He knew because he'd been counting. Not on purpose, his body just did that now. Years of operating in blackout zones had rewired something inside him, turned his internal clock into a weapon he couldn't shut off. 31 hours since the helicopter went down. 31 hours since the storm closed its fist around this frozen edge of nowhere. And 31 hours since he'd last heard a voice on the radio that wasn't static. He stood in the hallway of Fort Ketchikan Military Hospital with his rifle slung low, watching his men fall apart in the quietest way possible. Kyle Reaper Dawson was leaning against the wall near the supply closet. He had a gash under his ribs, deep, ugly, the kind that soaked through bandages like they were napkins. Every few minutes he pressed his hand against the dressing and winced, but he never made a sound. That was Dawson. The man could be bleeding out and still crack a joke about the food at Coronado. Travis Odom was worse. He sat on the floor near the nurse's station, head tilted back, eyes half closed, fighting to stay conscious. His skin had that gray look, the one Harding had seen too many times. The look that said the body was starting to give up, even if the mind hadn't signed off yet. Eli Voss paced the corridor like a caged animal, checking his magazine every 30 seconds, even though he knew exactly how many rounds he had. 22. He'd counted them 6 times already. Marco Salinas stood by the window, silent as always, watching the storm like it owed him money. And then there was Dr. Raymond Pratt. Harding watched the doctor move from room to room, checking charts, adjusting IV drips, giving orders to the older nurse, Gloria Vance, like any of it mattered, like charts could stop a blizzard, like medicine could fix what was broken here. But Harding saw the man's hands. They shook. Every time Pratt reached for a pen, every time he touched a chart, his fingers trembled like he was holding back an earthquake. Harding had seen that before too, in officers who knew the situation was unsalvageable, but couldn't bring themselves to say it out loud. "Chief." Eli stopped pacing and turned toward Harding, voice low. "Where's the pilot?" Nobody answered. Gloria Vance looked at the floor. Dr. Pratt cleared his throat and kept his eyes on his clipboard. The silence was the kind that has weight, the kind you can feel pressing against your chest. "Doc," Harding's voice was flat. "Where's the pilot?" Pratt finally looked up. "He passed earlier." Harding's eyes narrowed. "Passed? How?" "Fever, hypothermia complications. We tried everything we—" "Stop!" Harding held up one hand. Not anger, worse, the slow, mechanical acceptance of a man watching the last exit seal shut. He nodded once, and that single nod carried more grief than most men's funerals. Dawson caught it from across the hall. "Jack." Harding didn't look at him. "Jack, talk to me." "Nothing to talk about, Reaper." Harding's jaw tightened. "Pilot's gone. Storm's not breaking. Radios are dead. Sat phone's dead. Generators running on borrowed time." He paused. "You want me to say it?" "Don't." "We're trapped." Dawson closed his eyes. "I said don't." Eli kicked the wall hard enough to dent the drywall. "So what? We just sit here and freeze? That's the plan? We're Navy SEALs and the plan is to sit here and die? Lower your voice, Harding said, but there was no heat in it. Why? Who's going to hear me? The storm? Eli laughed, bitter, sharp, the kind of laugh that doesn't come from humor, but from a place where fear has eaten through everything else. We've called every frequency. Nothing. Even if someone hurt us, no bird can fly in this. We're dead, Chief. We just haven't stopped breathing yet. Marco Salinas finally spoke. Just 3 words, quiet as a prayer. He's not wrong. That hit Harding harder than anything Eli said, because Marco never spoke unless he meant it. The man had been through 4 deployments, 2 Purple Hearts, and a classified mission in Syria that nobody was allowed to mention. If Marco said they were done, the math wasn't looking good. Doctor. Pratt stepped into the hallway, his face gray. Chief Harding, if the generator fails, and it will fail, we lose heat within the hour. After that, we lose the medical equipment keeping your men stable. After that, he trailed off, but everyone finished the sentence in their heads. Gloria whispered, "Dear God." Harding exhaled through his nose, long, slow, controlled. The exhale of a man who had made peace with something terrible. He looked at his men. He looked at the doctors. He looked at the walls that were supposed to protect them and saw nothing but a coffin made of concrete and ice. "We're going to die here," he said. Not a shout, not a dramatic declaration, just a fact, delivered the way he'd deliver a mission brief. Calm, clinical, final. And that was when she moved. Nobody noticed her at first. She'd been at the nurse's station for the past hour, restocking gauze, checking IV fluid levels, counting morphine vials with a focus that seemed almost absurd given the circumstances. The rookie, the new girl, Lena Mercer, 27 years old, light blue scrubs under a winter parka 2 sizes too big, blonde hair pulled tight, and a face so calm it was almost offensive. Eli had already written her off. He'd muttered it loud enough for her to hear. Great, a rookie nurse. She'll freeze in 10 minutes. Marco had glanced at her once and looked away, filing her under civilian, irrelevant. Even Gloria, who should have been her ally, treated her like a student who'd wandered into the wrong classroom. But Lena didn't react to any of it. She just kept working. And now she stepped forward. Not fast, not dramatic, just a steady walk into the middle of the hallway, like she didn't need permission to enter a conversation between the most dangerous men in the building. "There's a helicopter," she said. Every SEAL turned toward her. Harding's eyes locked onto her face, and for a second, he looked at her like she'd spoken in a foreign language. "Yeah," he said slowly, "there is, and the pilot is dead." Lena didn't blink. "Then we don't need the pilot." Silence. 1 full second of it. Then Eli laughed. Hard. "Oh, that's great. That's really great. What is this? Some kind of motivational speech? You gonna tell us to believe in ourselves next?" Dawson coughed from the wall. Wet, ugly, but even he managed a half smile. "Sweetheart, this isn't TikTok. This is Alaska." Lena's expression didn't change. Not a flicker, not a flinch. She stood there like the laughter was wind and she was stone. "I can fly it," she said. The laughter came harder now. Eli doubled over. Even Marco cracked something that might have been a smirk. "Doctor." Pratt looked at her with pity, the kind reserved for people who've clearly lost touch with reality. Gloria grabbed her arm. "Lena, honey, stop. You're embarrassing yourself." Lena gently removed Gloria's hand. "I'm not embarrassed." Harding studied her. He wasn't laughing. He hadn't laughed once. His eyes moved across her face the way they'd move across a room before a breach, scanning, measuring, looking for the thing that didn't fit. And something didn't fit. He just couldn't see it yet. "Nurse," he said, and his voice cut through the laughter like a blade. Everyone went quiet. "You're telling me you can fly a Jayhawk variant through the worst ice storm Alaska has seen in 40 years? "Yes." "Based on what?" Lena looked at him, and for the first time, Harding noticed her eyes. Blue, clear, steady. Not the eyes of a scared rookie. The eyes of someone who had already decided what she was going to do and was just waiting for the rest of the room to catch up. "I learned on a unit that didn't get assigned pilots," she said. "We learned to take the controls ourselves." Eli snorted. "What unit? The Girl Scouts?" Lena ignored him. Her gaze stayed locked on Harding. "SEAL Team 9, Flight Cross-Training." The words landed like a grenade. Eli's laughter died mid-breath. His mouth stayed open, but nothing came out. Dawson's eyes snapped open, all the way open, and he pushed himself off the wall like his wounds had suddenly stopped mattering. Marco Salinas turned from the window so fast, his boots squeaked on the linoleum. His hand moved to his sidearm. Not to draw, just instinct. The instinct of a man who just heard a ghost speak. And Harding's face went blank. Not confused, not amused. Blank. The kind of blank that comes when every alarm inside a man's head fires at once, and the only safe response is to show nothing. His jaw locked so tight the muscle near his ear jumped. His breath caught. Just a half-second hitch. And for the first time that night, his eyes showed something other than cold calculation. Fear. Not of the storm, not of freezing, not of the smugglers that might be moving through the whiteout toward them right now. Fear of her, of what she just said, of what it meant if she was telling the truth. "SEAL Team 9. Eli repeated it slowly, like tasting something poisonous. "That unit doesn't exist." Lena held his stare. It existed, and it buried more people than the ocean. The hallway went so quiet that the generator's hum sounded like a scream. Dr. Pratt looked between the SEALs, confused. "What's SEAL Team 9? I've never heard of—" "You wouldn't have." Harding's voice was barely above a whisper. He didn't look at Pratt. He didn't look at anyone except Lena. Nobody has. Nobody's supposed to. He stepped closer to her, close enough that she could smell the cold on his jacket, the cordite on his gloves, the exhaustion on his breath. "What's your name, nurse?" "Lena." "Last name?" She hesitated just one beat, one half-breath of pause. But in that pause, the air in the hallway turned to glass. "Mercer," she said. "Lena Mercer." Harding's pupils dilated. She saw it happen. That tiny, involuntary reaction that the body produces when the brain receives information it doesn't want. He searched her face like a database, like every name he'd ever learned, every face he'd ever memorized in briefing rooms and classified files was being cross-referenced against this 27-year-old woman in oversized scrubs. "Mercer," he repeated. "Yes." Eli looked at Harding. "Chief, you know that name?" Harding didn't answer him. He was still staring at Lena, and something was shifting behind his eyes. Something heavy, something old, something that had been buried for a long time and was now clawing its way back to the surface. "Who trained you?" he asked. Lena's composure cracked. Not much, just a hairline fracture that only Harding would have caught. Her jaw tightened, her fingers curled at her sides, and for the first time, her voice carried weight that had nothing to do with confidence and everything to do with grief. "My father. His name." She swallowed. "Daniel. Master Chief Daniel Mercer." And Harding's face, the face that had stayed stone through 6 deployments, through ambushes and IEDs and the worst nights on Earth, that face broke. Not dramatically, not in the way faces break in movies. It broke the way ice breaks on a river. Slow, deep, irreversible. His eyes went glassy for half a second, then hard, harder than they'd been all night. His throat moved. His hand came up and pressed against his forehead like he was trying to hold his skull together. "He's dead," Harding whispered. "I know." Lena's voice was steady, but her eyes weren't. "He died making sure I could land." Gloria looked between them, lost. What is happening right now?" Nobody answered her. Because in that hallway, in that frozen outpost at the edge of the world, something had shifted. The SEALs weren't looking at a rookie nurse anymore. They were looking at a locked door they'd been leaning on without realizing, and it had just opened. Dawson pushed himself upright, wincing, blood seeping through his dressing. "Chief, if she's Daniel Mercer's daughter—" "I know what it means, Reaper. Then we need to move, now." But Harding didn't move. He stood there, eyes fixed on Lena, and she could see the war behind them. Trust, doubt, grief, hope, all of it fighting for control, and none of it winning. Then the generator stuttered. Not a full drop, just a dip, a soft, ugly lurch in the hum that made every light in the building flicker. The monitors chirped. The heating vents exhaled one breath of lukewarm air and then went silent. Just for a second, one single second. But it was the kind of second that tells you the clock has started counting backward. Gloria grabbed the wall. "No, no, 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 no." Pratt ran toward the maintenance panel. Eli raised his rifle toward the ceiling like the building itself was the enemy. Odom's eyes rolled, and Dawson caught him before he slid to the floor. "How long?" Harding asked. Not to Pratt, not to Gloria, to Lena, and she answered before anyone else could. "If it drops again, the generator fails within the hour. Then we lose heat. Then we lose lights. Then we lose people." She said it like reading weather, like she'd seen it before. Harding stared at her for 3 more seconds. 3 seconds that felt like 3 years. Then he nodded once. The same nod he'd given when he learned the pilot was dead. Except this time, it didn't carry grief. It carried a decision. "All right," he said, "show me." Harding turned to his team. "Eli, Salinas, main entrance. Nobody gets in. Dawson, stay with Odom. Doc, keep your patience breathing." His eyes swept the hallway one final time, then landed on Lena. "You and me. Hangar. Now." Lena didn't look back. She walked toward the stairwell like she already knew the route, like she'd walked it before in the dark. And Harding followed her, boots heavy on the concrete, rifle up, heart hammering against something he hadn't felt in years. Something that terrified him more than any storm. Hope. The stairwell swallowed them whole. Harding moved behind Lena with his rifle up. Every step deliberate, every breath measured. She walked ahead of him without hesitation, her hand trailing along the cold railing like she was counting steps she already knew. That bothered him. It bothered him more than the dead pilot, more than the dying generator, more than the 5 armed smugglers he was certain were moving through the whiteout toward this building right now. Because rookie nurses don't memorize stairwells in military hospitals they've only worked in for 3 weeks. "How long have you known about the helicopter?" Harding asked. His voice was low, controlled, the kind of quiet that carries more threat than shouting. Lena didn't slow down. "Since my first shift." "You inspected it." "I inspected everything." Harding's grip tightened on his rifle. "That's not what nurses do." Lena reached the bottom of the stairwell and pushed through the heavy fire door. "That's not what most nurses do." The corridor stretched ahead of them, long and dim, emergency lighting casting everything in a sickly amber glow. The smell hit immediately, engine oil, frozen metal, and something stale underneath it all, like a room that hadn't been opened in weeks. The wind was louder down here, pressing against the outer walls with a sound like something massive trying to breathe its way inside. Harding caught her arm, not rough but firm. She stopped. "Before we go in there," he said, "I need to know something." Lena turned to face him. Up close under the amber light, he could see the details he'd missed in the hallway. A thin scar along her left jawline, old, clean, surgical. Calluses on her palms that had nothing to do with nursing. And her eyes, those steady blue eyes that hadn't wavered once since she stepped forward and changed everything. "Your father ran Team 9, Harding said. It wasn't a question. "Yes. He was killed in action. Afghanistan, 2014. Lena's throat moved. 2013. November. I was there. The words hit her like a physical force. She didn't step back, but something behind her eyes shifted. A wall moving just slightly, revealing a room she kept locked. You were in Helmand, she said. I was 26. Your father was the reason I made it home. Harding's voice roughened at the edges, like sandpaper dragged across something raw. He pulled 3 of us out of a compound that was already burning, took a round through his shoulder and kept moving, kept carrying, didn't stop until we were clear. Lena's fingers curled at her sides. He never told me that. He wouldn't have. Men like Daniel Mercer, they carry it so others don't have to. For 3 seconds, neither of them spoke. The wind filled the silence with its howling, and somewhere above them, the generator coughed again. Shorter this time, weaker. Lena broke first. We're running out of time, Chief. Harding released her arm. Yeah, we are. They pushed through the hangar access door together, and Harding saw the Jayhawk immediately. It sat in the center of the space like a sleeping predator. Matte dark paint, rotors still, medical evacuation markings along the tail boom. A maintenance table stood nearby, tools scattered across it, and draped over a metal chair was a flight jacket. The dead pilot's jacket. Name tag still visible. Harding looked at it for 1 second too long, then forced his eyes away. Lena was already moving. She walked straight to the helicopter and ran her gloved hand along the fuselage. Not like someone seeing it for the first time, but like someone greeting an old friend they hadn't expected to meet again. You've flown one of these before, Harding said. I've flown worse. Worse than a Jayhawk in an Alaskan ice storm? Lena pulled herself up onto the side step and looked down at him. Worse than weather. Worse than people. That answer sat in Harding's gut like a stone. He'd heard men talk like that, men who'd been through the kind of operations that got sanitized out of official records. The kind where the mission brief was verbal, and the debrief was a handshake and a reminder that nothing happened. He'd never heard a woman talk like that. Not because women couldn't, but because whatever had put that tone in Lena Mercer's voice was something most human beings never survive long enough to describe. She climbed into the cockpit. Harding followed. The instrument panel was dark, battery indicator barely visible. The whole aircraft felt cold and still, like it had already accepted that it wasn't going to fly again. Lena reached for the switches with a practiced rhythm. Fuel gauge, hydraulic pressure, electrical system, engine intake status. Her hands moved without thinking. Her eyes tracked each readout with the speed of someone who'd done this 1,000 times in conditions far worse than a frozen hangar. Harding watched her hands, not for competence, for muscle memory. He wanted to see if her body knew the machine before her conscious mind engaged. And it did. Every switch flip, every gauge check, every adjustment, her fingers arrived before her eyes. That wasn't training. That was repetition under pressure. That was hundreds of hours in a cockpit that nobody had ever logged. What's your flight time? He asked. Lena flipped a breaker. A small panel light blinked alive, weak but breathing. Enough. That's not an answer. They didn't log my hours, Chief. They buried them. Harding leaned closer. The cockpit was tight. 2 seats, a center console, barely enough room for his shoulders. His face was less than a foot from hers. Who's they? Lena's jaw tightened. She didn't answer immediately. She checked the fuel gauge instead. Half tank, maybe less. Then she tested the starter. A weak click, nothing else. Who trained you to fly, Mercer? She stopped. Her hands came off the controls and rested in her lap. For the first time since Harding had met her, she looked like she was deciding whether to trust someone. Not with her life. She'd already done that by stepping forward upstairs. With something heavier, something she'd been protecting for years. Commander James Holt, she said quietly. Harding's face changed so fast it was like watching a mask get ripped off. His eyes went wide, then glassy, then hard, all in the space of a single heartbeat. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. He pressed his palm against his forehead and leaned back in the co-pilot's seat like the name had physically pushed him. "Holt," he breathed. "You knew him." "Knew him?" Harding's voice cracked. "Holt ran our insertion into Kandahar in 12. He was the best rotary pilot I ever flew with. He could land a Black Hawk on a rooftop in a sandstorm with one engine out and make it look like parking a car." He swallowed. "He retired in 15, moved to Montana. I heard he was doing private flight instruction." "He was," Lena said. "My father asked him to train me before his last deployment. Said every soldier should know how to get themselves home." "And Holt agreed?" "Holt owed my father his life. Twice." Harding closed his eyes. "When did Holt?" 3 years ago. Heart attack. He was in the left seat teaching me emergency auto-rotation when it happened." Lena's voice stayed level, but her hands had gone rigid in her lap. "I landed the helicopter alone. First time I ever had to. He was dead before the skids touched ground." Harding opened his eyes and stared at her. Not with suspicion anymore, not with doubt, with something that looked a lot like recognition, the kind that happens when you realize the person in front of you has walked through a fire you thought only your world contained. "He died making sure you could land," he said softly. "Yes. And your father?" "Died making sure I'd have a reason to." The cockpit went silent, just the wind outside pressing, always pressing. And in that silence, something between them shifted. Not trust, not fully, not yet, but the door was open. Harding exhaled. "All right, what do we need?" Lena snapped back into focus like a switch had been flipped. "Batteries low but functional. Fuel reads half, but I don't trust the gauge in these temperatures. Could be less. The starter's weak. I need to check the engine intake for ice buildup. If it's blocked, we're not going anywhere. And if it's clear, then I need 10 minutes to warm the systems and spin up. Maybe 15. We might not have 15. Then you better make sure nobody interrupts me." Harding almost smiled. Almost. "Your father used to talk like that." "My father taught me how to talk like that." Harding keyed his radio. "Eli, status." Static. Then Eli's voice, tense and clipped. "Main entrance secure. But Chief, Salinas is seeing movement outside. West side. Can't confirm numbers, but it's not wind." Harding's stomach dropped. "How many?" "Marco says at least 4, maybe more. They're using the storm." "Armed?" "He saw at least 2 rifles. They're not rescue, Chief." Harding looked at Lena. She'd heard every word. Her expression hadn't changed, but her hands were moving faster now, checking gauges, testing switches, working through the startup sequence with an urgency that hadn't been there 10 seconds ago. "Smugglers," Harding said. "I know." Lena didn't look up. "This outpost sits on a supply corridor. Remote storms like this are perfect cover for moving contraband. They've probably been using this route for years." "How do you know that?" "Because my uncle told me, before he assigned me here." Harding's eyes narrowed. "Your uncle?" "Admiral Richard Mercer." The second bomb in 5 minutes. Harding felt the ground shift under him again. Admiral Mercer, JSOC, the man who had personally overseen some of the most classified operations in the Pacific Theater. The man whose name alone could clear a room at the Pentagon. "You're telling me," Harding said slowly, "that an admiral placed his niece, a trained pilot with classified flight experience, in a remote Alaskan hospital disguised as a rookie nurse?" "Yes." "Why?" Lena finally looked at him. "Because he knew this night was coming. Not the storm, the people in it." Harding felt cold run through him that had nothing to do with the temperature. This was a setup. This was protection. Your team was being tracked. Someone sold your flight route. The storm was supposed to ground you here, and the smugglers were supposed to do the rest. Lena's voice was steady, but underneath it, something burned. "My uncle couldn't send a full security detail without tipping off whoever leaked the intel. So he sent the one person nobody would suspect. A nurse. A Mercer. Harding sat with that for 3 full seconds. 3 seconds of recalibrating everything he thought he knew about this night, about this hospital, about this woman. Every assumption he'd made, every dismissive glance from his team, every joke about the rookie, landed differently now, like punches thrown at someone who was wearing armor nobody could see. Dawson and Odom, Harding said. They were the targets? The intel your team extracted on the last mission. It's still on Dawson's encrypted drive. The people outside want it destroyed, and they want everyone who's seen it eliminated. Harding's hand moved to his radio. Eli, listen to me carefully. This isn't random. We are the target. Harden the entrance. Nothing gets through. Do you understand me? Eli's voice came back sharp. Copy. Chief, how bad is this? As bad as it gets. Harding out. He turned to Lena. How fast can you clear that intake? 3 minutes if the ice isn't too deep. You've got 2. I'll cover you. Lena grabbed the de-icing spray and the toolkit from the maintenance table. She popped the engine intake panel, and the cold hit her face like a fist. Ice had crusted inside the mechanism. Thick, layered, the kind that builds over hours of sub-zero exposure. She sprayed, scraped, and worked with fingers that were already going numb. Harding positioned himself between her and the hangar door. Rifle up, eyes locked on the only entrance. The wind screamed through the gaps in the doorframe, and somewhere beyond it, in the whiteout, the shapes were getting closer. Talk to me, Mercer. How's it looking? Ice is thick, but it's cracking. She drove the edge of a flathead screwdriver into a frozen chunk and twisted. It broke free with a sound like bones snapping. Almost there. Faster. I am going faster. A bang echoed from somewhere above them. Not the wind, not the generator. Something else, something deliberate. Harding keyed his radio again. Eli? Nothing. Eli, report. Static. Then, gunfire. Distant, muffled by floors and concrete, but unmistakable. The sharp crack of a rifle, then another, then the rapid stutter of return fire. They're inside, Harding said. Lena didn't stop working. Her hands moved faster, scraping, spraying, her breath coming in white clouds that the wind tore away the moment they formed. She sealed the intake panel and sprinted back to the cockpit. Get in, she told Harding. Now! He didn't argue. He climbed into the co-pilot seat while Lena strapped in and hit the starter. A click. A groan. The engine coughed, rough, weak, fighting against the cold the way a drowning man fights water. Come on, Lena whispered. Don't die on me. Another cough. The rotors twitched. A shudder ran through the airframe like the machine was trying to remember what it was built to do. Then nothing. Dead silence. Lena slammed her palm against the console. Not rage, focus. She closed her eyes for 1 second, breathed in through her nose, and pulled out the emergency checklist from the side pocket. Her eyes scanned the pages. Fuel system, electrical, hydraulics, backup starter protocol. And then she froze. 1 line, 1 problem. The fuel feed valve. It was closed. Not frozen, not malfunctioning. Closed. Deliberately. The switch had been flipped into the off position by human hands. Lena stared at it, and the blood drained from her face. Chief, she said, and her voice carried a tone Harding had never heard from her before. Not fear, something colder. Someone shut off the fuel feed. Manually. Harding's head snapped toward her. What? This wasn't ice. This wasn't mechanical failure. Someone sabotaged this helicopter. Harding looked at the switch. She was right. The position was deliberate. Pushed flush, locked into the off detent. No amount of vibration or cold would do that. A person did that. A person who knew exactly what they were doing and exactly what it would mean for anyone trying to fly out of here. Who had access to this hangar? Harding demanded. Maintenance staff, medical personnel, the pilot. Lena's eyes were moving now, scanning the hangar floor below them through the cockpit glass. And anyone the pilot trusted enough to let in. The pilot's dead. Exactly. That word landed like a door slamming shut. Harding followed her gaze down to the hangar floor. In the dim amber of the emergency lights, everything looked like shadows. The maintenance table, the tool carts, the row of storage lockers along the far wall, the hanging tarps that divided the work area from the storage bay. And then Lena saw him, a figure standing half hidden behind the maintenance lockers, tucked into the gap between a hanging coat rack and the concrete wall, wearing hospital scrubs, holding a radio in one hand and a pistol low against his thigh. Not a smuggler, not a SEAL, a staff member. Lena's mouth went dry. The man wasn't shaking. He wasn't hiding. He was watching the chaos with the calm, patient expression of someone who had been waiting for this exact moment. His eyes moved to the helicopter, then to the cockpit, and Lena felt his gaze lock onto her through the glass, like a rifle scope finding its target. She recognized him. Mitchell Webb, maintenance technician. He'd been at Fort Ketchikan for 2 years. Quiet, reliable. The kind of man nobody noticed because he never gave anyone a reason to look twice. The kind of man who could sabotage a helicopter and no one would ever suspect him. Lena keyed the intercom, barely a whisper. Chief, corner, behind the lockers, hospital staff, armed. Harding didn't move his head. His eyes shifted, just his eyes, and found the figure in the shadows. Webb's pistol rose, slowly, deliberately, aimed at the cockpit, aimed at Lena. The muzzle flash came at the same moment Harding grabbed Lena's shoulder and pulled her down. The round tore through the already cracked cockpit glass and buried itself in the headrest of the pilot's seat, exactly where Lena's skull had been 1 second before. The sound of the shot echoed through the hangar like a thunderclap, mixing with the wind and the distant gunfire from the floors above, into something that sounded like the end of the world. And Lena, lying flat in the pilot's seat with glass in her hair and blood on her cheek, said the calmest words she'd spoken all night. He's shooting at the cockpit. He wants the bird grounded. He's one of them. Harding was already out of his seat. He dropped from the cockpit to the hangar floor, hit concrete, rolled once behind the helicopter's landing skid, and opened fire. 2 shots, controlled, precise. The kind of shooting that doesn't come from the range. It comes from years of putting rounds exactly where they need to go when everything is falling apart. Webb ran, not toward the exit, not toward the smugglers, toward the fuel controls. Because he didn't need to kill them. He just needed to keep that helicopter on the ground long enough for the men outside to finish the job. Lena watched him move and understood everything. This wasn't one traitor. This was a network. Webb, the smugglers, whoever had sold her team's flight route, all connected, all waiting for this storm. And the only thing standing between everyone in this building and a frozen grave was a helicopter that a saboteur had crippled and a nurse that nobody believed could fly. She reached down and flipped the fuel feed valve open. Then she hit the starter again. The engine coughed. Not the weak, dying sound it made before. This time it caught, rough, ugly, shaking the airframe like a sick animal trying to stand. The rotors moved, slow, 1 rotation, 2. Then the engine sputtered and the whole system groaned back toward silence. Lena's fist hit the console. No, you don't get to quit. She ran through the sequence again. Battery, fuel, starter. Her fingers moved so fast they blurred, hitting switches in a pattern that had been burned into her hands years ago in a Montana field with a dead man in the seat beside her. She could still hear Holt's voice in her head, calm, patient, even as his own heart was failing him. Restart protocol, Lena. Don't panic. The machine wants to fly. You just have to remind it. She hit the starter again. Below her, the hangar had become a war zone. Harding moved through the space like he was part of it, low, fast, using every piece of cover the way a river uses rocks. He fired twice more at Webb's position, and the rounds sparked off the fuel control housing. Webb had ducked behind a heavy tool cart and was crawling toward the maintenance bay, still clutching his radio, still trying to reach the smugglers. "Mercer!" Harding's voice cut through the noise. "Status! Fuel feed is open. Engine's fighting me. Fight harder!" A burst of automatic gunfire erupted from the direction of the hangar door. Not Harding's rifle, not Webb's pistol, something heavier. The smugglers had found the hangar entrance. The first one came through the broken door frame, already shooting. Rounds punched into concrete, into metal, into the side of a storage unit that erupted in sparks and noise. Harding rolled behind the helicopter's front landing gear and returned fire. 2 shots, controlled, surgical. The smuggler dropped. A second one stepped over the body and fired a long burst that tore across the hangar ceiling. The overhead work lights shattered, glass rained down. The hangar plunged into near total darkness, lit only by the weak amber of the emergency system and the intermittent flash of muzzle fire. Lena ducked as fragments hit the cockpit windshield. Her ears rang. Her hands were shaking now, not from cold, not from fear, but from adrenaline pushed so high her nervous system was starting to overload. She closed her eyes. 1 second, breathed in through her nose, out through her mouth. Holt's voice again. "The machine wants to fly." She opened her eyes and hit the starter. The engine caught. This time it held. Rough, rattling, fighting the cold with everything it had, but alive. The rotors began to turn, slow at first, then faster, building speed with each revolution, the sound climbing from a groan to a whine, to something that filled the hangar like a living thing waking up angry. Harding heard it. The smugglers heard it. Everyone in the building heard it. And everything changed. "She got it running!" Harding shouted into his radio, hoping someone above could hear through the static. "Bird is spinning up! Get everyone to the hangar, now!" His radio crackled. Nothing. Then Eli's voice broke through, ragged and breathless. "Chief, we've got 3 down up here. They breached the east corridor. Salinas is hit." Harding's blood went cold. "How bad?" "Shoulder, through and through. He's still fighting, but..." Gunfire drowned out the rest. "Eli, get everyone down here." "Dawson, Odom, the doctors, everyone. We are leaving. Do you copy?" "Copy, moving." Harding turned and saw Webb break from cover. The maintenance technician wasn't running for the fuel controls anymore. He was running toward the hangar door, toward the smugglers, waving his radio, shouting something that the rotor noise swallowed. But Harding didn't need to hear the words. He could read the body language. Webb was directing them, pointing at the helicopter, telling them where to aim. Harding lined up the shot. Webb was 30 feet away, moving fast, half lit by muzzle flashes. A difficult shot, not impossible. Harding breathed out and squeezed the trigger. The round hit Webb's radio and tore it out of his hand. Webb screamed, not from the hit, from the shock, and stumbled sideways into the maintenance bay. His pistol came up wild, and he fired 3 times at nothing, panic shots that hit the ceiling and sent more debris raining down. "Webb!" Harding's voice boomed across the hangar. "Put it down! It's over!" Webb's response was another shot. This one came close enough that Harding felt the air move past his ear. "Your choice," Harding muttered, and moved after him. In the cockpit, Lena watched the RPM gauge climb. 15%, 20. The rotors were gaining speed, but the engine was cold and the systems were sluggish. She needed at least 60% rotor speed before she could even think about lifting the skids. And the hydraulic pressure was low, dangerously low. If it dropped below the red line, the flight controls would become dead sticks in her hands, and the helicopter would become a very expensive coffin. "Come on," she whispered. "You've got this. We've both got this." 30%, 35. The airframe was vibrating now, the kind of vibration that travels through the seat and into your spine, and tells you the machine is either about to fly or about to tear itself apart. Then the stairwell door burst open, and Eli came through first, rifle up, moving backward, firing into the corridor behind him. Dawson came next, half carried by Dr. Pratt, his face white as paper, the dressing under his ribs soaked completely through. Odom stumbled behind them, supported by Gloria, who looked like she was running on nothing but terror and the refusal to let go. And behind them all, Marco Salinas walked with his rifle in one hand and his left arm hanging useless at his side, blood running down his fingers and dripping onto the concrete with every step. Lena counted them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 people. The helicopter was rated for 10, including crew. It would be tight, it would be heavy, but it could work. "Get them in!" she shouted from the cockpit. "Everyone in now!" Eli reached the helicopter first and yanked open the side cargo door. "Dawson, you first. Move." "I can walk," Dawson growled. "You can barely breathe. Get in the bird." Pratt and Eli lifted Dawson into the cabin. He collapsed against the bulkhead and immediately reached for his rifle. Because even dying, Kyle Dawson was going to die shooting. Odom went next, Gloria pushing him up from below while Eli pulled from above. Odom's eyes rolled back for a terrifying second, then snapped forward again. "Stay with me, Travis," Gloria's voice broke. "Stay with me." Pratt climbed in and immediately went to work on Dawson's wound, tearing open a fresh dressing pack with his teeth. His hands were shaking worse than ever, but they found the wound and pressed down with a firmness that surprised even him. Marco Salinas reached the helicopter and stopped. He turned around, put his back against the skid, and raised his rifle, one-handed toward the hangar door. "Salinas, get in," Eli said. "Not yet." "Marco, I said not yet." His voice was quiet, final. The voice of a man who had already decided what his job was and was going to do it regardless of what his body thought about the matter. Eli looked at Harding, who had just emerged from the maintenance bay. Harding's knuckles were bleeding. Webb wasn't with him. "Webb?" Eli asked. "Handled." Nobody asked what that meant. "Where are the smugglers?" Gloria asked from inside the cabin, and the fear in her voice was so raw it made Lena's chest hurt. As if answering her question, 3 more figures appeared at the hangar entrance. They came in shooting, no warning, no demands, just automatic fire directed straight at the helicopter. Rounds punched into the airframe, into the concrete, into the storage units. One hit the tail boom, and the ping of metal on metal made Lena's heart skip. Harding and Eli dropped to cover and returned fire. Marco, still standing against the skid with one working arm, fired 3 precise shots and dropped 2 of them. The third scrambled behind the bent hangar door and kept shooting. 45% rotor speed, 50. The noise was deafening now, the downdraft pushing dust and debris in every direction. "Chief," Lena shouted, "I need..." Harding's voice left no room for discussion. He dropped his spare magazine at Eli's feet. "Take this. Cover the door from inside. I'll get Marco and we'll board last." Eli stared at him for 1 second. Then he grabbed the magazine, turned, and sprinted to the helicopter. He threw himself through the cargo door and immediately took position, rifle aimed out the opening toward the hangar entrance. 55%. 58. Harding ran to Marco. "Time to go, Salinas." Marco, they were 10 feet from the cargo door when a smuggler stepped around the far corner and fired. The round hit Marco in the vest, center mass. The impact knocked him backward into Harding and they both went down. Marco gasped, the sound of a man whose lungs just got crushed against a ballistic plate. And for 3 terrible seconds, he couldn't breathe. "Marco!" Harding was already pulling him up, dragging him the last 8 feet to the helicopter. "Eli, grab him!" Eli and Pratt reached out and hauled Marco inside. He hit the cabin floor hard, rolled onto his back, and lay there gasping like a fish pulled from water. But he was alive. The vest held. 60%. 62. "Chief, get in!" Lena screamed. Harding fired 4 more rounds at the smuggler behind the corner, then turned and ran. Lena pulled the collective up with her left hand and pushed the cyclic forward with her right. The helicopter shuddered. The skids scraped against concrete. The whole aircraft rocked sideways, and for one sickening moment, it felt like it was going to tip over. Gloria screamed. Odom slid across the cabin floor. Dawson's hands shot out and caught him. "Easy!" Harding shouted from behind Lena. "Easy on the controls." "I don't need easy," Lena said through clenched teeth. "I need airborne." She pulled harder. The skids left the ground. 1 inch, 6 inches, a foot. The helicopter climbed, swaying, fighting, every system protesting the cold and the weight and the storm that was waiting for them outside. A bullet hit the underside of the fuselage, and the impact rang through the cabin like a bell. Another hit the tail assembly. Eli opened the cargo door 6 inches and fired down at the hangar floor, keeping the smugglers back long enough for Lena to gain altitude. 5 feet, 10 feet. The rotor wash blasted debris in every direction below them. Papers, tools, dust, broken glass, all of it swirling in a violent tornado beneath the aircraft. Lena aimed for the hangar door, or rather where the hangar door used to be. The smugglers had torn it wide enough to create an opening, and now that opening was her runway. She adjusted the cyclic, pointed the nose toward the gap, and pushed. The helicopter surged forward and burst through the opening into the storm, and the storm hit back. The wind caught the aircraft like a hand slapping a toy. The helicopter yawed hard left, nose pitching down, alarms screaming from every system that had an alarm to give. Lena's arms burned as she fought the controls. The cyclic tried to tear itself from her grip. The collective vibrated so hard her wrist felt like it was breaking. "We're too heavy," Eli shouted from the back. "She's losing altitude." Dawson's voice, weak but sharp. The altimeter was dropping. 20 feet, 15. If they hit the ground at this angle, with this weight, at this speed, the helicopter would cartwheel, and there wouldn't be enough left of any of them to identify. Lena stopped fighting the wind. She let the gust push her left, used the momentum to swing the tail around, then jammed the right pedal and pulled the collective to its stop. The engine screamed. The rotors bit into the air with everything they had. The helicopter climbed. Barely. 1 foot per second. 2. The altimeter numbers crawled upward like they were being dragged. 30 feet. 40. 50. "Hold on!" Lena banked right, following the contour of the terrain she couldn't see but somehow felt, the way her father had taught her, the way Holt had drilled into her on those cold Montana mornings. Fly by feel. Trust the machine. Trust yourself. 60 feet. 80. 100. The worst of the ground-level turbulence fell away. The wind, can we make it on half a tank? Depends on the headwind. And if we can't? Lena didn't answer that question. She didn't need to. They both knew what running out of fuel meant in an Alaskan whiteout at night with no landing zone and no backup. Behind them in the cabin, Dr. Pratt worked on Dawson's wound with hands that had finally stopped shaking. The engine was overheating, which meant something was wrong with the oil system or the cooling intake, or both. She didn't say anything, not yet. She adjusted the throttle, reduced power slightly, and watched the gauge. It kept climbing. "Mercer," Harding had seen it too. "That gauge. I see it. What's the red line? We're 30 degrees below it. And climbing. And climbing." Harding looked at her. "Options. Reduce airspeed and hope it stabilizes, or maintain speed and risk the engine seizing. If the engine seizes, auto-rotation, controlled descent. We hit the ground hard, but maybe in one piece." "Maybe. That's the best word I've got right now, Chief." Harding sat back. He looked over his shoulder at his team. Broken, bleeding, exhausted, but alive. Every single one of them alive because a woman they'd laughed at 3 hours ago was now the only thing between them and the frozen ground below. "Reduce airspeed," he said. "We get there slow if we have to, but we get there." Lena pulled back on the throttle. The engine temperature stabilized, then dropped 1 degree, then another. She exhaled. Not relief, just the brief acknowledgement that death had blinked first this time. 40 minutes later, the storm began to thin. Not much, just enough to turn the solid white wall into something closer to heavy snow. Lena could see shapes below now, ridge lines, tree lines, the faint suggestion of terrain that meant they were getting close to civilization. FOB Coldfoot, this is medical evac flight emergency, no call sign, requesting immediate clearance and medical teams on the ground. 9 souls on board, multiple wounded, low fuel. Please respond. Static. Lena's chest tightened. She tried again. FOB Coldfoot, emergency traffic, 9 souls, multiple critical, requesting any available frequency. More static. Then a click. Then a voice. Young, startled, clearly not expecting anyone to be flying in this. Unidentified aircraft. This is Coldfoot Tower. Say again? Coldfoot Tower. We are a Jayhawk medical variant out of Fort Ketchikan. We have 9 aboard, multiple gunshot wounds, 1 critical. We are low fuel and requesting emergency landing clearance. Now. A pause. Then the voice came back, more alert this time. Copy, Jayhawk. You are cleared for emergency landing on Pad 2. Medical teams are being dispatched. Ma'am, who's flying that aircraft? Lena almost laughed. Almost. Someone who wasn't supposed to be able to. The landing was hard. The wind gusted at the worst possible moment. 20 feet off the ground, nose slightly high, and the helicopter dropped the last 10 feet faster than Lena wanted. The skids hit the pad with a shock that rattled every tooth in every head inside the cabin. Dawson groaned. Odom didn't make a sound at all, and for one horrible second, Gloria thought they'd lost him. "Travis!" She shook him. "Travis!" His eyes opened, barely. "Stop yelling," he mumbled. "I'm trying to sleep." Gloria sobbed. One hard, sudden sob that she swallowed immediately, because there was too much work left to do for crying. The rotors were still spinning when the medics reached them. The cargo door flew open and the cold rushed in. But this time the cold carried voices and hands and the organized urgency of people who were there to help, rather than hurt. Dawson went first, then Odom, then Marco, who refused the stretcher and walked on his own 2 feet until he was 5 steps inside the building, and his knees buckled, and 2 corpsmen caught him. Lena sat in the pilot's seat and didn't move. Her hands were still on the controls. Her fingers were locked around the cyclic, and she couldn't make them let go. The adrenaline was draining out of her like water from a cracked vessel, and what it left behind was something she wasn't prepared for. Not relief, not pride, just emptiness. The vast, echoing emptiness that comes after you've been running on nothing but will for hours, and the will has finally done its job and has nowhere left to go. Harding appeared at the cockpit door. He looked at her hands. He looked at her face. And he understood, because he'd been there himself, on other nights, in other cockpits, after other missions that should have killed him, and didn't. He reached over and gently pried her fingers off the cyclic, one by one, like removing someone's grip from a lifeline. "It's over, Mercer," he said quietly. "You can let go." Lena's hands fell into her lap. She stared at them like they belonged to someone else. "I flew," she said, and her voice sounded like it was coming from very far away. "Yeah," Harding's throat was tight. "You flew." He helped her out of the cockpit and down from the helicopter. Her legs hit the ground and buckled. Harding caught her, held her upright, and for one brief moment, just one, Lena Mercer leaned against a man she'd met 4 hours ago and let herself feel the weight of everything she'd just done. Then she straightened up, pushed the hair from her face, and walked toward the building on her own 2 feet. Because Mercers don't get carried, they carry others. She was 3 steps from the door when the black SUV pulled up. The SUV's headlights cut through the falling snow like 2 white knives. The engine was still running when the rear door opened, and a man stepped out with the kind of deliberate calm that only comes from decades of commanding rooms without raising your voice. Admiral Richard Mercer, 63 years old, silver hair cropped tight, dress blues under a heavy overcoat, a face that looked like it had been carved from the same granite they used to build monuments. Hard, weathered, unreadable. He moved toward the helicopter pad with a stride that made the 2 armed escorts behind him look like they were the ones trying to keep up. Lena stopped walking. Her legs had been carrying her toward the building on autopilot, one foot, then the other, the mechanical rhythm of a body that had already emptied itself of everything except motion. But when she saw the SUV, when she saw that door open, when she saw the silhouette she'd known since childhood step into the snow, her feet stopped and her chest locked up like someone had reached inside and grabbed her lungs. Harding was behind her. He saw the Admiral at the same moment, and something in the way Lena's body went rigid told him this wasn't a surprise inspection. This was personal. The Admiral didn't look at the SEALs first, didn't look at the medics, the helicopter, the damage. He looked straight at Lena. His eyes found hers across 30 feet of snow-covered tarmac, and they stayed there. "Lena," he said, not loud, not soft, just her name, spoken the way you speak the name of someone you've been waiting to hear from for a very long time. Harding's head snapped toward Lena. "Mercer, you know the Admiral?" Lena didn't answer. She couldn't. Her throat had closed around something she'd been holding down for hours, for years, and now it was trying to come up all at once. The Admiral closed the distance between them, 20 feet, 10, 5. He stopped in front of her and looked at her face. The glass cuts on her cheek, the blood in her hair, the hollowed-out expression of someone who had just pulled 9 people from the edge of death and was now standing on the other side wondering how she got there. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No, sir." "Don't lie to me, Lena." "I'm not hurt, Uncle Richard." Her voice cracked on the last word, just barely, just enough. Behind them, Eli Voss had been helping the medics unload Odom. He stopped mid-stride. His head turned slowly toward Lena, then toward the Admiral, and his mouth opened like he was about to say something, but his brain hadn't caught up yet. Harding stepped forward. "Sir, with respect, what's going on?" The Admiral looked at him, studied him the way a man studies a tool he sent into dangerous work, checking for damage, checking for function, checking to see if it did what it was supposed to do. "Chief Warrant Officer Harding," the Admiral said, "you and your team were never assigned a rookie nurse for luck." Harding felt the ground shift, not physically, something deeper. The kind of shift that happens when the story you thought you were living in turns out to be a chapter in someone else's book. "She was here because I put her here," the Admiral continued, "for your protection, for this exact night." Eli was close enough to hear now. So was Dawson, who was being loaded onto a stretcher, but had grabbed the medic's arm and made him stop. "Wait," Dawson said. "Wait, what did he say?" The Admiral turned and addressed all of them. The SEALs, the doctors, the nurses, every exhausted and bleeding person who had survived the last 5 hours. 3 weeks ago, Naval Intelligence intercepted communications indicating that a network operating along the Alaskan supply corridor had obtained your team's flight route. They knew when you were coming, where you'd refuel, and which hospital you'd use in an emergency. Your mission intel, the data on Dawson's encrypted drive, was the target. The storm wasn't coincidence. They'd been waiting for weather severe enough to ground your aircraft and eliminate your team in a location too remote for quick response. Silence. The kind that tastes like metal. "I couldn't send a full security detail," the Admiral continued. "Whoever leaked your route had access to operational channels. Any overt protection would have been flagged, and they would have adjusted. I needed someone inside that hospital who could respond when the situation went critical. Someone no one would suspect. Someone trained. He looked at Lena, and for the first time, the granite cracked. Just slightly, just at the edges of his eyes, where the lines deepened and his jaw softened by a fraction that only family would notice. "Someone I trusted with my life," he said quietly. Lena swallowed hard. Her eyes were burning, but she wouldn't blink. Not here, not in front of them. Eli's face had gone through 4 different expressions in the last 30 seconds. Confusion, disbelief, anger, and something that looked a lot like shame. He looked at Harding. "Chief, we called her a rookie. We said she'd freeze in 10 minutes. Harding said nothing. "We laughed at her, Chief." "I know. And she knew the whole time. She knew why she was there. She knew what was coming. And she still let us—" Eli's voice broke off. He ran both hands through his hair and turned away. Dr. Pratt stood near the helicopter's cargo door, holding a bloody dressing in one hand, staring at Lena like he was seeing a different person than the one he'd worked beside for 3 weeks. A person he'd given orders to. A person he'd treated like a student. He opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. "Nurse Mercer, Not now, Doc." Harding's voice was gentle, which made it worse. The Admiral wasn't finished. He took one more step toward the group, and his voice dropped into the register that men use when they're about to say something that matters more than anything else they've said that day. Her father was Master Chief Daniel Mercer. He was one of the greatest SEALs I ever served with. He ran operations that this country will never acknowledge and saved lives that will never be counted. He was killed in action in Afghanistan in November 2013. He paused. The snow fell around them in silence. He died so others could live. And tonight, his daughter did the same. Marco Salinas was leaning against the building's doorframe, his wounded arm in a field sling, his face gray with blood loss and exhaustion. He hadn't spoken since they landed, but now he straightened, slowly, painfully, using the doorframe to push himself upright. His good hand came up and touched his forehead in a salute. One by one they followed. Eli next, his jaw tight, his eyes wet, his hands shaking as it rose. Dawson from the stretcher. He couldn't sit up, but he lifted his right hand and held it at his temple, trembling with the effort. Odom, barely conscious, opened his eyes just enough to see what was happening and managed a nod that carried the weight of a full salute. And Harding stepped forward until he was close enough to see the cuts on Lena's face, the dried blood in her hair, the way her hands hung at her sides with fingers that were still curled from gripping the flight controls. He didn't salute immediately. He looked at her the way he imagined he would have looked at her father, with the raw, unguarded respect of one warrior recognizing another. "Ma'am," he said, and his voice was rough in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. "I'm sorry for what was said in that hangar, all of it." Lena shook her head. "You were scared, Chief. So was I." "No," his jaw worked. "You weren't scared. I was watching. You weren't scared for 1 second." Lena almost told him the truth, that she'd been terrified, that her hands had shaken so badly at one point she thought she'd dropped the de-icing spray, that when Webb's bullets shattered the cockpit glass, she'd felt her whole body try to shut down. And the only reason it didn't was because somewhere deep inside her, a voice that sounded exactly like her father's said, "Not yet, Lena, not yet." But she didn't say any of that. She just looked at Harding and said, "My dad used to say that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's deciding that something else matters more." Harding's throat moved. He swallowed once, hard, and then he saluted her. Sharp, clean, the kind of salute that's not a formality, but a promise. The Admiral watched the whole thing with an expression that only Lena could have read. Pride, grief, relief. And underneath all of it, the specific kind of pain that belongs to a man who sent his dead brother's daughter into harm's way because there was no one else he trusted enough to send. "Lena," the Admiral touched her shoulder, "we need to debrief." I know. It can wait an hour. Get your injuries checked first. They're scratches. They're glass wounds on your face. Get them checked. That's not a request. Lena almost argued. Then she caught the look in his eyes. Not the Admiral's eyes, her uncle's eyes, and she nodded. Inside the base medical facility, a corpsman cleaned the cuts on Lena's face while she sat on a metal exam table and stared at the wall. The adrenaline crash was hitting her now, wave after wave of exhaustion that rolled through her body like a tide she couldn't fight. Her hands had finally unclenched, and they lay open in her lap, palms up, raw and red from the cold and the controls and the screwdrivers she'd used to break ice out of an engine intake while men with rifles tried to kill her. Gloria found her there. The older nurse appeared in the doorway, still wearing the same blood-streaked scrubs she'd been in all night, her hair falling loose from its clip, her eyes red and swollen. She stood there for a long moment, and Lena could feel the weight of what she wanted to say pressing against the silence between them. 3 weeks, Gloria finally said. 3 weeks we worked together. I showed you where the supply room was. I told you how to fill out intake forms. She laughed, one short, disbelieving sound. I told you to make sure you labeled the IV bags correctly. Lena looked at her. I did label them correctly. I know you did. That's what kills me. You did everything right. You showed up on time. You were quiet. You were polite. You restocked the gauze and counted the morphine, and you never, not once, gave any of us a reason to think you were anything other than what you appeared to be. That was the point. Gloria crossed the room and sat down next to her. The exam table creaked under their combined weight. Were we ever in danger? Before tonight, I mean, while you were watching. Lena hesitated. This was the part she'd been trained not to share. But Gloria had held pressure on Marco's gunshot wound while bullets tore through the hangar around her. She'd earned an honest answer. There were 2 supply runs that came through the hospital in the last month that didn't match any scheduled deliveries, Lena said. I reported them to my uncle. He confirmed they were test runs, the network probing the route, seeing if anyone noticed. No one did. Except you. That's why I was there. Gloria was quiet for a long time. Then she reached over and took Lena's hand. Not gently, firmly, the way you hold someone's hand when you want them to know you're not going anywhere. Your father, Gloria said, tell me about him. Lena's composure, the composure she'd maintained through gunfire and sabotage and an impossible takeoff in a machine that had every reason to stay on the ground, finally cracked. Not dramatically, not loudly. Her chin dropped, her eyes closed, and when she spoke, her voice sounded like it was coming from a place she didn't let anyone see. He was the strongest person I've ever known. Not just physically. He had this way of being in a room that made everyone calmer. Even when things were bad, even when the world was falling apart around him, he'd just look at you and you'd believe it was going to be okay. Sounds like someone I know, Gloria said softly. He taught me to fly before his last deployment. I was 16. Every weekend for 3 months, we'd go up with Commander Holt in a borrowed training helicopter. Dad would sit in the back and Holt would walk me through the controls, and Dad would watch. Just watch. He never said much during the lessons, but afterward on the drive home, he'd say things like, remember how the cyclic felt in the crosswind? Remember what your body told you before the gauges did? Trust that. Trust yourself. Lena opened her eyes. They were wet but clear. I didn't understand why he was so intense about it. I was 16. I thought it was just his thing, his way of bonding. But now I know. He knew what was coming. Not this specific night, but nights like this. He knew the world he'd lived in would eventually touch the people he loved, and he wanted to make sure I had the tools to survive it. Gloria squeezed her hand. He'd be proud of you. Everyone keeps saying that. Because it's true. Then why doesn't it feel like enough? Gloria didn't have an answer for that. Nobody does. When the person whose approval matters most is the one person who can never give it again. The debriefing happened 2 hours later in a windowless room at the center of the base. Admiral Mercer sat at the head of a metal table. Harding sat across from Lena. Two intelligence officers from JSOC stood against the wall with tablets and faces that gave away nothing. The Admiral led with what they already knew. The smuggling network had been operating along the Alaskan corridor for 18 months. Mitchell Webb had been recruited, or coerced, approximately 6 months ago. He'd been feeding information about flight schedules, staff rotations, and security protocols to the network through a series of encrypted radio transmissions disguised as routine maintenance communications. Webb has been talking since we took him into custody, one of the intelligence officers said. He claims he was blackmailed, says they had evidence of gambling debts and threatened his family. Harding's expression didn't change. And the pilot? The room went quiet. The Admiral folded his hands. The pilot's death has been reclassified. Initial finding was hypothermia complications. That's being revised. Lena felt the temperature in the room drop. He was murdered. We believe Webb administered a compound that mimicked fever symptoms and accelerated hypothermic response. The pilot was dead within hours. Without him, the helicopter was grounded, and the hospital's only evacuation option was eliminated. That was the plan, Harding said slowly. Kill the pilot, ground the bird, wait for the storm, send in the team, and eliminate everyone who could identify the network or testify about the intel your team extracted. The Admiral looked at Harding. You were never supposed to leave that hospital, Chief. Harding sat with that for a long moment. He thought about Dawson, bleeding against the wall, Odom fighting to stay conscious, Marco standing with one arm and refusing to stop shooting. He thought about the moment in the hallway when he'd said, "We're going to die here," and meant it. And he thought about the woman sitting across from him who'd heard those words and decided, calmly, quietly, without asking permission, that she was going to prove them wrong. The intel on Dawson's drive, Harding said. What was worth all of this? The intelligence officer glanced at the Admiral. The Admiral nodded. Your team extracted communications from a compound in the Aleutians that linked the smuggling network to 3 active-duty military personnel in PACOM. If that data reaches the right analysts, it dismantles an operation that's been funneling weapons and classified materials through Alaska for almost 2 years. The network knew that. They were willing to kill everyone in that hospital to prevent it. Harding looked at Lena. And you knew all of this before you set foot in Fort Ketchikan. I knew enough, Lena said. My uncle briefed me on the threat. He told me there was a mole inside the hospital, but he didn't know who. My job was to watch, report, and if everything went sideways, get your team out alive. By pretending to be a nurse. I am a nurse, Chief. I have the degree and the license. That part wasn't pretend. But the flying, the combat training, SEAL Team 9, Harding leaned forward. That part was real too. My father made sure of it. The Admiral spoke then, and his voice carried the kind of weight that settled arguments before they started. SEAL Team 9 existed for 18 months, 2011 to 2013. Off the books, high-risk insertions in theater that couldn't be traced back to any official command structure. Daniel Mercer created it, led it, and when it was disbanded, he personally ensured that every member was reassigned to units where their skills would be protected and their identities would be buried. Every member except his daughter, Harding said. Lena was never a member, the Admiral replied. She was what Daniel called his contingency. He knew that if anything happened to him, the knowledge he'd given her, the training, the flight hours, the understanding of how that world operated, would be the only inheritance worth leaving. Lena stared at the table. Her jaw was tight. Her eyes were fixed on a scratch in the metal surface, tracing its path like it could lead her somewhere that didn't hurt. He told me once, she said, that the most dangerous thing in the world isn't a weapon. It's a person who's been underestimated. She looked up. He wasn't talking about himself. He was talking about what he was turning me into. The debriefing lasted another 40 minutes. Details, timelines, statements. The mechanics of survival translated into bureaucratic language and filed into folders that would be classified before the ink dried. When it was over, Lena stood, and her chair scraped against the floor with a sound that felt too loud for the silence. The Admiral stopped her at the door. "Lena," she turned. He looked at her for a long time, not as an admiral, as the man who had held her when she was 6 years old and asked where her daddy went, as the man who had sat with her mother at the funeral and said nothing because there was nothing to say, as the man who had watched this girl grow into something her father would have recognized and feared for and been proud of all at once. "Your mother can never know," he said quietly, "about tonight, about any of it. I know. She thinks you're working a quiet nursing job in Alaska. Boring. Safe. That's what I promised her. I know, Uncle Richard. If she finds out I put you in the path of—" He stopped. His voice had thickened, and he needed a second to clear it. "She already lost Daniel. If she thought for one moment that I risk you, she won't find out." Lena's voice was steady. "I'll call her tomorrow. Tell her about the snow. Tell her the coffee here is terrible. She'll believe it because she wants to." The Admiral nodded. He reached out and touched her face, gently, carefully, avoiding the bandaged cuts, the way her father used to when she was a child and had fallen off something she shouldn't have been climbing. "He would have been proud of you, Lena, not because you flew that helicopter, because you chose to." Lena's eyes filled. She blinked once, twice, held it. "I didn't choose," she whispered. "There was no choice. There was just what needed to be done." The Admiral almost smiled. That's exactly what Daniel would have said. She left the room and walked down the corridor alone. Her boots echoed on the concrete floor, and each step felt heavier than the last, like gravity was increasing with every foot she put between herself and the room where her story had been turned into reports and filed under headings she'd never see. She found an empty room at the end of the hall, a chair, a table, a cup of coffee that someone had left behind, cold, bitter, forgotten. She sat down, wrapped her hands around the cup, and stared at the wall. For the first time in hours, no one was shooting at her. No one was bleeding. No one needed her to fly or fight or pretend to be something she wasn't. And in that silence, in that stillness, the weight of everything that had happened settled onto her shoulders like a physical thing. She thought about Webb's bullet shattering the cockpit glass 2 inches from her skull. She thought about pulling Dawson's body into the helicopter with her bare hands. She thought about the moment the engine caught and the rotors started turning, and she felt something that wasn't relief or triumph, but something older and more complicated, the feeling of a promise being kept. A promise her father had made to her without ever saying the words. She thought about her mother, sitting in their house in Virginia, probably watching television, probably drinking tea, probably looking at the clock and wondering if Lena was warm enough. And she thought about her father, not the SEAL, not the commander, not the ghost whose name could silence a room full of operators. She thought about the man who taught her to ride a bike, who burned pancakes every Sunday morning and pretended it was on purpose, who held her hand when she was afraid of thunderstorms and said, "Listen to it, Lena. It's just the sky reminding you it's there." She put the cup down and covered her face with both hands. And in that empty room, at the edge of the world, Lena Mercer finally cried. Not the quiet kind, not the kind you can hide behind a steady voice and clear eyes. The kind that comes from the deepest part of you, the part that holds everything you've been carrying and can't carry anymore. She cried for her father. She cried for Holt. She cried for the pilot whose name she didn't even know, who died in a bed 50 feet from a helicopter he would never fly again. She cried for the 16-year-old girl in Montana who didn't understand why her father was so desperate to teach her to land. And when it was over, when the tears had run dry and her breathing had steadied and the room had stopped spinning, she lifted her head, wiped her face with the back of her hand, and stood up. Because the thing about Mercers is that they break. They all break. but they put themselves back together before anyone can see the cracks. The door opened. Harding stood there. He didn't ask if he could come in. He didn't wait for permission. He just walked to the chair across from her, pulled it out, and sat down like he'd done it 100 times before, in 100 different rooms, after 100 different nights that left marks no one else could see. Lena wiped her face one more time. Fast, efficient, the way you clean a weapon. Not because you're embarrassed, but because the job requires it. You don't have to pretend, Harding said. I'm not pretending. Your eyes are red. It's dry air. Harding almost smiled. Your father used to say the same thing. Every time. Dry air, allergies, dust, anything except the truth. Lena's hands tightened around the cold cup of coffee. You keep mentioning him like you knew him well. I did. How well? Harding leaned back. His body looked like it had been through a car accident. Cuts on his knuckles, a bruise forming along his jaw from where Webb had gotten one hit in before Harding ended it. Dust and dried blood on his jacket. But his eyes were clear, focused, like the physical damage was just background noise to the conversation he'd come here to have. Helmand Province, October 2011. Your father pulled me out of a burning compound with 2 broken ribs and a piece of shrapnel in my thigh. I was 26. I'd been in the teams for 3 years, and I thought I was invincible. That night taught me I wasn't. Your father taught me what to do about it. What did he teach you? That surviving isn't enough. You have to survive and then keep going. Keep moving. Keep being useful. Because the moment you stop, the moment you sit down and decide you've done enough, that's when the world takes everything back. Lena stared at him. He said that to you? Not in those words. Your father wasn't a speech guy. He said it by doing it. He had 2 broken fingers on his left hand when he pulled me out. Didn't mention it until 3 days later when the medic noticed the swelling. 3 days. He'd been operating, loading magazines, eating MREs, doing everything with 2 broken fingers, and he never said a word. That sounds like him. That is him. That's exactly who he was. Harding paused. His jaw worked for a moment, like he was chewing on something he wasn't sure he should swallow. And that's exactly who you are, Mercer. Tonight, everything you did, the way you did it, quiet, no drama, no announcements. You just handled it, exactly like Daniel. Lena put the cup down. Her fingers were trembling again, not from cold this time, not from adrenaline, but from the effort of holding herself together in front of a man who kept reaching into the one place she couldn't protect. I need to ask you something, she said. Ask. SEAL Team 9. When I said the name in that hallway, your face, all of your faces, it wasn't just surprise, it was something else, something deeper. Harding was quiet for a long time, long enough that Lena thought he might not answer. The building hummed around them, heating systems, generators, the distant murmur of a base that was awake and operational, and completely unaware that 9 people had almost died 60 miles away. Team 9 was different, Harding said finally. You have to understand, in our world there are teams, and then there are teams. The ones with numbers everyone knows, the ones that get books written about them, the ones that become legends. Team 9 wasn't that. Team 9 was the opposite. It existed to do the things that couldn't be traced, that couldn't be acknowledged, that couldn't exist in any official record, because if they did, the geopolitical fallout would have been catastrophic. What kind of things? The kind where 6 men get on a helicopter in the dark, and 4 come back and nobody asks about the other 2 because the answer would start a war. Lena's breath caught. Your father ran it for 18 months, hand-picked every operator, designed every mission, and when it was over, when the program was shut down because someone in Washington got nervous about deniability, he didn't just disband the team, he erased it. Every file, every record, every trace. He met with each man individually and said the same thing. This never happened. We never existed. And if the day comes when someone says our name, you'll know it's family." Lena felt the words land like stones dropped into deep water. "So when you stood in that hallway," Harding continued, "a 27-year-old nurse in scrubs that were too big for her, and you said, 'SEAL Team 9, you weren't just saying words. You were speaking a language that only 7 people in the world understood. 3 of them are dead. 2 are retired somewhere I'll never know. 1 is in this building, and 1," he looked at her, "1 was standing in that hallway, telling me that her father had taught her the password to a door the rest of the world doesn't even know exists." Lena's eyes closed. She saw her father's face, not the face in the photograph, not the dress uniform face, but the real face, the one she saw across the kitchen table on Sunday mornings, the one that looked at her with quiet intensity when he said, "Again, Lena, do the startup sequence again." "I thought he was just being careful," she whispered. "I thought, maybe paranoid. He'd been through so much. I figured the training was his way of coping, his way of feeling like he was protecting me even when he wasn't there." "It was," Harding said, "but it was also more than that. He knew what he'd built. He knew the enemies he'd made, and he knew that someday, somehow, the ripple effects of the things he'd done would reach the people he loved. So he did what Daniel Mercer always did. He prepared. He prepared me. He made you into something that could survive anything, and tonight you proved him right." Lena opened her eyes. They were wet again, but she didn't wipe them this time. She just let the tears sit there, unashamed, because Harding was the first person she'd met since her father's death who understood that crying and strength were not opposites. "There's something else," Harding said. His tone shifted, heavier, more careful, the tone of a man about to hand someone a loaded weapon. "What?" "The debriefing. The intel officer mentioned 3 active-duty military personnel connected to the network. I heard. One of them is a name I know." Lena straightened. "Captain Neil Sorensen. He was your father's operations officer during the last 6 months of Team 9. He handled logistics, flight routes, communication protocols. He had access to everything." The air between them changed. Lena felt it. A cold current running through the room that had nothing to do with Alaska. "You're saying someone from my father's own team?" "I'm saying that when your father disbanded Team 9 and erased the records, Sorensen was the one man he didn't trust to stay quiet. Daniel told me that himself. The last conversation we ever had, 2 weeks before his final deployment, he said, 'Watch Sorensen. Something's wrong with that man's eyes.' And you didn't report it? To who? The unit didn't exist. The people in it didn't exist. There was no chain of command to report to because the chain was never built. That was the whole point." Harding leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "But I watched. For years, I watched. And 6 months ago, when your uncle briefed me on the Alaskan network and told me the leak was coming from inside Paycom, I knew. Sorensen. Sorensen sold your father's network to the people who wanted it most. He sold the routes, the protocols, the contacts. And when your team extracted that intel from the Aleutians compound, Sorensen realized that the data would lead straight back to him. That's why tonight happened. That's why Webb was recruited. That's why those men came through that storm with rifles. Not just for the intel, for survival. Sorensen's survival." Lena felt something ignite in her chest. Not grief, not fear, but something hotter and older. Anger. The pure, clean kind that comes from discovering that the betrayal wasn't random. It was personal. "My father trusted him. Your father trusted everyone on that team. That's what made him great, and it's what made him vulnerable. Where is Sorensen now? That's not your concern." "The hell it isn't." Harding held her stare. "Mercer, listen to me. Your uncle is handling Sorensen. NCIS has a warrant. The data on Dawson's Drive will be the last nail. Sorensen will spend the rest of his life in a cell at Leavenworth, and he'll die there knowing that the daughter of the man he betrayed is the one who made it possible." Lena sat with that. She turned it over in her mind, examining it the way she examined engine components, checking for cracks, for weaknesses, for the thing that didn't fit. My father would have wanted to face him. Your father would have wanted you safe. There's a difference between justice and revenge, and Daniel knew exactly where the line was. He taught you the same. I saw it tonight. When Webb grabbed you, when he had that gun in your ribs, you didn't kill him. You could have. You were trained to. But you disarmed him and let me handle the rest. That's because you were there. That's because you made a choice. The same choice your father made every time he had the option to end something ugly or end it right. Lena's jaw loosened. The anger didn't disappear. It settled, like a fire banking itself down to coals, still hot, still alive, but controlled. He'd want me to let it go, she said, not a question. He'd want you to let the system handle the man and spend your energy on the people who are still alive because of what you did tonight. Lena thought about Dawson, about the way his hand had grabbed Odom's arm when the helicopter hit the ground hard, stopping him from sliding across the cab, about Marco standing against that skid with one working arm, refusing to board until everyone else was safe, about Gloria's sob when Odom opened his eyes, about Eli's face when he realized what he'd said to her and what she'd been carrying the whole time. How are they? She asked. Your men. Dawson's in surgery. They think he'll keep the kidney, but it's going to be close. Odom is stable. Concussion, hypothermia, but he's talking, which is more than he was doing an hour ago. Salinas refused morphine. Said he wanted to be awake in case... Harding stopped. His mouth twitched. In case you needed him for something. He barely knows me. He knows enough. We all do now. A knock on the door interrupted them. Eli stood in the hallway, his face washed, his hair wet from a shower he'd clearly taken too fast. He looked smaller without his gear, younger, more human, like the bravado had been stripped away and what was left was just a man in his late 20s who'd almost died and was trying to figure out what to do with the fact that he hadn't. Hey, he said. Hey, Lena said. Eli shifted his weight, looked at the floor, looked at the ceiling, looked everywhere except directly at her. So I said some things. You did. In the hallway, when you said you could fly, I said, I remember what you said, Voss. He flinched at his last name. Then he forced himself to look at her. I called you sweetheart. I said it wasn't TikTok. I said you'd freeze in 10 minutes. And then you flew us out of a firefight in a helicopter that shouldn't have been able to start, through a storm that should have killed us, and landed at a forward base 200 miles away on half a tank of fuel. He swallowed. And I'm standing here trying to figure out how to apologize for that, and I can't because there aren't words big enough. Lena looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, Sit down, Eli. He sat, like a kid called to the principal's office, hands between his knees, eyes down. My father, Lena said, spent 20 years in the teams. You know how many times someone underestimated him? Probably never. Every single time. First time, every time. Because he was quiet. Because he didn't look like what people expected. Because he smiled too much and talked too little, and people mistook calm for weakness. She leaned forward. He told me once, and I've never forgotten this, he said, the ones who underestimate you are the ones who'll be most surprised when you save their lives. And surprise, Lena, is the most powerful weapon you'll ever carry. Eli's eyes glistened. He blinked rapidly and looked away. He sounds like he was something else. He was. I wish it just needs people to remember that the ones who look the least dangerous are sometimes the ones holding everything together. Eli wiped his eyes with his sleeve. Rough, fast, the same way Lena had wiped hers earlier. Copy that, he said, and his voice cracked on both words. Harding put a hand on Eli's shoulder. Go check on Dawson. He's out of surgery. Eli nodded, stood, and walked to the door. He stopped at the frame and turned back one more time. Mercer. Yeah? His hand rested on the frame, and he stood there without turning around for several seconds. When he finally spoke, his voice was stripped down to its foundation. No rank, no authority, no tactical control. Just a man talking to someone who changed the way he saw the world. There's a tradition, he said, unofficial. When someone saves the life of a SEAL, they're carried. Not literally, but from that day forward, their family. They're protected. They're never alone again. He turned his head just enough to see her. You didn't save one SEAL tonight, Mercer. You saved 5. And a doctor. And 2 nurses. And yourself. He paused. So you should know, from this moment on, you're never alone again. That's not a promise from me. That's a promise from every man on that helicopter. And SEALs don't break promises. He left. Lena sat alone in the silence. She sat with the weight and the grief and the pride and the emptiness and the coffee that had gone cold hours ago. She sat until the sky outside the window she couldn't see began to shift from black to gray to something that might eventually be blue. Then she stood, because Mercers don't stay sitting. 3 days later, she returned to Fort Ketchikan. The storm had passed. The sun reflected off fresh snow and made the world look clean, like nothing had happened, like the building hadn't been a battlefield 72 hours earlier. The hangar door had been replaced. The bullet holes in the corridor walls had been patched. The maintenance bay had been scrubbed so thoroughly it smelled like bleach and paint. But the people inside remembered. Dr. Pratt met her at the entrance. He stood straighter than she'd ever seen him, but his eyes were different, humbled, older, like he'd aged a decade in 3 days, and was still trying to make peace with the man he'd been before that night. Nurse Mercer, he said, I owe you an apology. Several, actually. I treated you like you didn't belong here, and it turns out you were the only one who truly did. Lena looked at him. You kept Dawson alive when I was in the cockpit. You worked on his wound with bullets hitting the walls around you. Don't apologize, Dr. Pratt. Just keep being the doctor you were that night. His chin trembled. He nodded once and stepped aside. Gloria was waiting behind him. She didn't say anything. She just opened her arms and Lena walked into them. And they held each other in the doorway for a long time. Not the way colleagues hold each other, the way survivors do. I put your name back on the schedule, Gloria said. Next Tuesday, 7 a.m. Don't be late. Lena laughed. It was the first real laugh she'd produced in days, and it felt strange in her chest, like a muscle she'd forgotten she had. I won't be late. That night, alone in her quarters, Lena opened her locker and pulled out the one thing she'd brought from home that wasn't practical. A photograph. Her father in his dress uniform, standing in their backyard in Virginia, squinting against the sun with that quiet smile he had. The one that said he knew things he'd never tell. The one that said he loved her in a language deeper than words. She traced the edge of the photo with her thumb. I get it now, Dad, she whispered. Why you made me learn. Why you pushed so hard. Why you spent every weekend in that helicopter with Holt when you could have been resting. Why you taught me startup sequences instead of bedtime stories. She pressed the photo against her chest. You weren't training me for something. You were training me for everything. For the night when the power goes out and the bullets come in and someone has to be the one who doesn't break. You knew that person had to be me, and you made sure I'd be ready. She put the photo back, closed the locker, pressed her forehead against the cold metal. I was ready, Dad. I hope you saw it. 4 weeks later, a package arrived. No return address, just a military postal code that led to no traceable unit, no traceable base, no traceable anything. Inside was a small box, and inside the box was a patch. Black fabric, white thread, an eagle clutching a trident, and below it, a number that didn't appear in any military database, 9. And underneath the patch, a handwritten note. The handwriting was tight, controlled, precise. Harding's handwriting, she knew immediately, because it looked exactly the way the man spoke. Your father built Team 9 to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. Last night, you carried that mission further than any of us ever did. This patch was never sanctioned. This unit was never acknowledged. And this honor was never authorized. But every man who wore it would have wanted you to have it. You flew us home when no one else could. That makes you one of us. Always. Harding. P.S. Dawson kept the kidney. He says you owe him a beer. Odom says you owe him a smoother landing. Salinas says nothing, but he asked for your mailing address, which from Marco is basically a love letter. Lena laughed, and then she cried, and then she laughed again, because that's what happens when the people you saved refuse to let you carry the weight of saving them. She pinned the patch to the inside of her locker door, right next to her father's photograph, where no one would see it. Because some honors aren't meant for display. They're meant to be carried quietly, in the same secret place where grief lives, where pride lives, where the memory of a father's hands on the controls lives forever. She closed the locker and went to work, because that's what Mercers do. They don't ask for recognition. They don't wait for the world to catch up. They don't stand in the spotlight and explain what they've done. They do the thing that needs to be done. They carry the people who can't carry themselves. And when it's over, when the storm has passed and the wounds have closed, and the reports have been filed in rooms they'll never see, they show up for the next shift. 7 a.m., Tuesday, scrubs on, badge clipped, IV bags labeled correctly, and somewhere inside, quiet as a heartbeat, the steady knowledge that when the world goes dark again, and it will go dark again, she'll be the one holding the light. Not because she chose to be a hero, but because her father chose to raise one.